In today's video, I'm going to teach you how to machine embroider a t-shirt. Make sure you stick around to the end so you learn all of the tips and tricks on how to embroider on t-shirts. Attention all machine embroidery beginners. Are you struggling to hoop your fabrics, don't know what thread to use, or even what tension is? Sign up for our free Embroidery for Beginners course and become an expert in no time. Click the link in the description to get started. Now the first thing you have to do is choose your design, and I printed off a template of my design at the actual size that I'm going to be embroidering. This is really great if you're first learning how to embroider, because when you do your placement, you know if your design is going to fit within your hoop, and you know if your design is going to be straight, because when you print within your software, you usually have an X and Y line that shows you your horizontal and vertical points. One thing you always want to try to do is make sure you choose a hoop size that is close to the embroidery size so it reduces the movement within the frame. Now we already have our t-shirt, now we need our stabilizer, and the stabilizer we're going to use for t-shirt material is generally a cutaway stabilizer. You want to make sure that your fabric, which is sheer and stretchy, has some security behind it for the t-shirt. Now there's two different options that I suggest. One is a no-show mesh, and I have two different colors here so that you can actually see the grid marks on the black a little easier than the white. It looks like it has a heat press grid going in both directions. That makes it really strong so that you know there's going to be minimum movement on the actual fabric, but it is so sheer and light you won't have any marks of the fabric showing through when you cut it away. If you're using a standard cutaway stabilizer, like a 2.5 ounce stabilizer, which most of you will probably start out with, these are wonderful. They will hold everything securely, but because they're a little bit thicker, when you do cut away the stabilizer, you might see some stabilizer shadow showing through. So both are great to use. This one is just a little bit sheer and will give you better results. Now we've chosen our appropriate threads, and this of course is up to you as the embroiderer, and you want to make sure you choose threads that are suitable for the design and the color of the garment that you're going to be embroidering. You don't always have to follow the thread guidelines that the designer, like we would give you. We might give you threads, but you'll want to make sure that you choose the threads that are appropriate for your project. And lastly, we want to make sure we have our scissors, because I want to cut out my template when I do my actual placement for hooping. And you'll want to make sure you don't use your good fabric scissors, because odds are you will dull them, somebody will yell at you. One of those two things are guaranteed to happen. So you want to make sure you use a pair of scissors that you're not overly concerned about to cut paper with. And I have some regular pins that I'm just going to pin my template in place, so when I put it on the machine, I can definitely hit that center point when I start my design to make sure that it's going to start embroidering exactly where I want it. Now for this design, I have to choose the placement on my t-shirt, and because this is a rather large design, we're going to be doing this right in the center of the shirt. So it's not going to be left chest or right chest, it's going to be right in the center. And generally when I do something like that, I look at the size of the design, I look at my hoop size, but most importantly, I look at the t-shirt that I'm using. There are different hooping aids for placement that are available, and we do carry and offer those as well. But when you're first starting out, you'll want to make sure that printing that template and physically pinning it in place and seeing how it actually looks on the shirt, and if you hold it up to your body, you can actually get a great idea. There are also hooping aids which we can use if you're doing repetitive hooping, where you're doing 5 different shirts all the same size, and you want to make sure that the placement is identical on every one of those. Then hooping aids like this allow you to set up your hoops and put them in place with our magnets and our little items, so that that hoop is secured in there. That way every time I go to hoop this over and over again, I know that the hoops are going to be exactly in the same place and I'll get identical results. But for this, we're going to cut out our template, and I usually like to cut it out as close to the area as I can, so I'll cut away everything that's there so that I just have a template that I can pin in place. So I'm going to take my piece of paper here, and I'm just going to very quickly cut out fairly close to the edge, and I'm trying to cut it as square as possible, because if I am retaining the entire shape and I'm going around an item that has all kinds of curves, then I like to use this template almost as a bit of a guide to make sure that I'm straight and there is a line that's going horizontally and vertically across. Now if I look at my shirt, I'm going to see that on my shirt, I'll probably do something like this. I want it to be sort of center to this area here, right across my chest. So when I place this on the table, and again, I'm not using a hooping station because if you're just starting out with embroidery, odds are you won't have one. But if I'm looking at this and I'm putting this down, this placement right here, where I can see the line going straight across and is just coming up above the actual armpits and about a 2-inch space from the center of the bottom of the collar down. So you just want to make sure that your design isn't too far up and close to your neck or too far down so it doesn't look like it's properly placed. So once I have that in place, I'm going to take this and I'm going to make sure that my shirt is nice and straight across my table. I want to make sure that the shoulders of how it was cut are straight across as well. If you are creating an area that you're doing hooping consistently and you just have a table or a surface, it doesn't hurt to take some painter's tape and go straight across your table with a horizontal line and maybe do the same vertically as well, because that will give you a square that you can position if you don't have a hooping station that will help you aid in that way as well. But once I know that this is nice and straight across, then I'm going to take this and I'll go right down from the center and make sure everything is lined up. I know you could measure this all day long and make sure that everything is perfect, but I found for the most part, if you just sort of eyeball things, make sure things look like they're in place, and then I'm going to take a couple of pins and I'm just going to pin this in the top, and then I'm going to come in and pin it from the bottom. That way I have it pinned in place, and then I can lift this while it's pinned and I can give a visual and see if this looks like it's actually properly in place. So once you have it pinned in place, you can put it up against your body, make sure that you will kind of see if it looks too high up onto your neck or too low down. You'll just remove that template, move it up or down a little bit, and make sure the placement is exactly where you want it. So now that my design is in place, and if I have my hoop set up where I want it to be, I need to decide where I'm actually going to have the top of the hoop actually be, because this little arm is the piece that I'm going to slide in to the arm on the machine that will control to go, right or left or up or down. And I want to make sure that I have it set in the, most easiest place to get access to it. So if I were to take this and I were going to hoop it up towards the top here, I might have an issue because I'm looking at this right now and I can see that even if I get this nice and centered exactly where I want it, I have to come in through the neck to actually hoop this item. And that's going to be difficult to do. So what I want to make sure I do before I start is choose how I'm going to hoop this, and the logical way to hoop this item will be so that the area that you're going to slide into the hoop bracket is going to be at the bottom so that I can get in through the body. So now that I've chosen the positioning of my hoop, I want to make sure that I have it kind of in place so that if I take my fingers and look on either side from the hoop, from here to here and from here to here, I can see that the placement is going to be nice and equal. And one thing that I do suggest even before you do that is you can try to preset your hoop a little bit before you start. If the hoop is really tight when you start and then you can barely get it out from either side, then you know when you hoop it, you're going to be fighting with your hoop. So what I usually do is I will take a look at my material for my t-shirt, and I know it's fairly thin and my stabilizer is fairly thin, and I'll loosen my hoop just a little bit so as I open it up on either end and I look through this little area right here, I can see a certain amount of space in the hoop, and that actually allows me at this point to slide it in and out fairly easily, but keeping in mind because I've preset it a little bit, I should be able to hoop it without having to fight with the hoop and try to loosen it while it's within the shirt and get in through the neck or the body. So I'm really trying to preset things as much as possible so that I will be able to hoop this with ease. One of the most frustrating things is fighting with your garment and your hoop and your stabilizer, when you get things done. Now the other thing is, because I printed a template, it has that X and Y on there that shows me the center position of the design, but most importantly, it shows me when things are horizontal and vertical, because on most of your hoops within your home machine, it doesn't matter what brand it is, we're using a Brother hoop, but I can see there is a little notch on the horizontal and a notch on the vertical. And I've pretty much lined up so that those are exactly where they should be. Most of you will also have templates that come with your actual, hoops or your machines as well. And these are great little, resources so that I can get in there. And if you really want to double check if you're lined up, you can get in here and you can put that template down and you can see everything lines up just perfectly. Now, before we hoop this, if you want to learn more about the basics of embroidery, make sure you check out the Embroidery for Beginners course. Click the link in the description for more information. Now, choosing between the two, I'm going to go for the no-show mesh because I know I'm going to get better results, and it is a little sheerer and thinner, and I know that when we cut away the stabilizer, we're not going to have anything showing as far as a stabilizer shadow is concerned. So I'm just going to measure off a piece, and I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to cut straight across, and I'm going to make sure that I hoop my stabilizer and my material within this hoop so that everything is 100% secure. Some people I know like floating their materials on top of their stabilizer, meaning that the stabilizer is hooped and they just will float the fabric on top. But I generally find you get a lot more puckering in your designs. There's no stability to hold it together, and it's just a much better and safer practice to securely hoop your fabric with your stabilizer on an item that you're going to wear. Now, hooping a finished garment can be one of the most frustrating things because you have to get inside of the garment with your hoop and your stabilizer, and everything has to line up perfectly, and your stabilizer can't move, and after you hoop it, a lot of times you'll look inside and your stabilizer won't be fully intact. So what I like to do is have a little safety insurance in there. If you are using a hooping station like this, then you really aren't faced with those issues as much because your hoop is being held in place exactly where you want it, and then you can actually use your magnets to actually hold your stabilizer in place as well, so you know that when you slide your shirt over top, you're not going to have any movement and your stabilizer is going to be exactly where you want it. So to kind of replicate that whole process without having an actual hooping station, you could just take your stabilizer, put it down, take a little bit of painter's tape, and you can use the tape to temporarily hold down your stabilizer in place. And again, we're going to remove this as soon as we finish hooping, but if I temporarily hold it there, and if I take this side here and I just fold this over a little bit and hold this on the other side, just something like that, that way I can take this and slide it into my actual garment and know that it's going to have a little bit of something there, so it's not going to be sliding around until I want to put the actual hoop in place. Now, it does help if you have a third arm, but God didn't give us that, so we're going to have to come in here carefully, open up through the opening, and slide this in place exactly where we want it so it lines up with the template. This is the tricky part of hooping a garment on a flat surface, is you have to get in here and position everything all around, make sure that your stabilizer is nice and flat on the inside, and then make sure that you position your hoops so that everything lines up 100%. So this does take a little bit of time, and that's why when you get into doing embroidery, you find that you end up having all kinds of stashes. You have a stabilizer stash, you have a scissor stash, you have a thread stash, and you probably have a hooping accessory stash, and you probably will look at one of the hooping aids in the future because it just makes your life so much easier. So now that I have it somewhat in position, before I try to put the hoop down, I usually feel around the outside and I make sure that I have, and I use my fingers as gauges, I kind of make sure that I have my hoop sort of centered and in place, keeping in mind that I'm really concerned about having everything horizontally set and vertically set. That's my big issue. I don't want to have any movement going either direction because there's nothing worse than looking at a design and tilting your head like this to make it straight. You want to make sure that that is perfectly straight across. It doesn't really matter if you are up or down a little bit or even side to side a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect within the hoop because we have our template in place and we're going to drop our needle position in the center of the design when we start it. But it is still good to make make sure that you do try to have it as close as possible to center in the hoop, because that way it's going to give you kind of even distribution and stitching and pull all the way around the design. So that looks pretty good there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my fabric and stretch it out a tiny little bit. Because this is a t-shirt and it is a milled material, and all of your garments are going to be sewn on the bias, which means they have more stretch this way and less stretch this way, you really have to make sure that you have your fabric kind of pulled out, and you don't want to stretch it too much, but you just want to make sure that it actually does not have any kind of like, waffling within it when you hoop it. So I've made sure that it's taut all the way around. I've pressed in the two top parts of the hoop, and it's at this point here while I have it pressed in that I'll kind of look around my item and make sure that everything is nice and pulled tight all the way around. And then I'm going to go in with my palms and I'm going to push down and forward and make sure that that is going to be pushed in place. Now, I did not have to really, fight with that at all. I preset my hoop. It went in. It was nice and snug as it went down. So it wasn't too loose. It wasn't too tight. A little bit of pressure on my palms, and it went right into place because I had that forward and down motion. And I didn't fight with it at all. And if you look at that, the placement is good, and it's nice and taut within the actual hoop. You don't want to have any of your fabric showing like little bumps or ripples. You want to make sure that it is good. Always give it that little bit of a oomph within the hoop to make sure that it's set within the hoop properly, and then it's ready to go on the machine. And again, we're going to make sure that we have this nice big opening here where we can attach the frame. And at this point, I'm going to take off the tape that I put on here, which was just to temporarily hold that stabilizer in place. And if you look at the back, my stabilizer is all the way around. It's in place everywhere on the design, and it actually looks almost as taut as the front does. Now, we've loaded the design in the machine and we made sure that the design is positioned properly. You always know your design within your machine has sort of a P that appears, and if you draw a P on your actual template, if you're ever questioning if you're in the right direction, when you actually turn it to see, you can make sure that it lines up visually with what you see on your screen. So it's not too hard to figure out, but you want to make sure that it's in the right position. Otherwise, you could sew your design upside down accidentally and ruin the shirt. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to almost turn this shirt inside out, because this is a single needle machine that is on a flat bed. A lot of the commercial machines are tubular machines which have an arm, and that allows you to put your hoop on and all of your material hangs out of the way. But in this situation, we need to make sure that we almost make a little bowl in which we're going to be having the shirt sew inside. So I want to get all of this material underneath of the actual needle, slide it in place, and then make sure that I slide this hoop in and then push it all the way back like that and clamp it into position. And then I can come in and just kind of organize all of my excess material so that it is out of the way. Now, there's all kinds of little things you can do. You could use a little bit of either painter's tape or clamps. I've seen people use all different types of things to hold their material out of the way. But generally, it's a good idea to watch your machine as it sews if you're sewing a finished garment, because otherwise something could fall into the area that it's stitching. And you could, if it is a clamp that falls into your machine and it goes underneath your needle, you could damage the machine. So you want to make sure that you have all of your material out of the way. Nothing is trapped underneath of the hoop, because you don't want to hoop or sew through your shirt and then it won't be usable. And once that's in place, and because I did try to make sure that my center was on my hoop and I used my template to verify, I can see that if I drop my needle down, it's almost right on that crosshair. I really don't need to position anything. If I needed to, I could go into the settings on the machine and move it horizontally or vertically so that it lined up to the exact position that I want. Now if you do want to make sure that you're 100% lined up to that little crosshair on your template, I can drop my needle position down and I can just very, very quickly go and make sure that I'm lined up to both the X and the Y. And at that point, I know that it's exactly where I want. I'm going to raise my needle, and it's at this point right here that I'll just very, very quickly remove the pins within the template. And now I can remove that template and I'm ready to sew the design. For all you Embroidery Design Club members, be sure to print off the accompanying cheat sheet recipe card for this video to keep by your machine to make embroidering on t-shirts even easier. If you're not a member, click the link in the description below to learn more. Don't forget that as an Embroidery Design Club member, you can instantly download all your cheat sheet recipe cards to help you quickly and easily embroider virtually anything. Plus, you'll also get access to over 30,000 embroidery design, bonus projects, free giveaways, live training, and more. Click the link in the description below to learn more about our fan favorite embroidery club now. Well, the design's all done. We're just going to remove the hoop from the frame and take it off. We're going to clean it up a little bit and voila. Now I do have a very sharp pair of scissors, and I'm just going to very quickly remove any extra little threads that I might see. I find doing this while it is still in the hoop makes it a little bit easier to get into areas that could otherwise be difficult to get into if you have taken it out of the hoop and it isn't pulled as tautly. So I'm just going to give a couple of little snips, and that's pretty much it. I can see the embroidery is done. One more little one right here. Then I'm going to remove it from the hoop. I'll remove the back side of the hoop. I'm going to turn it inside out. And again, you can trim any little excess threads that you see that are there. And I'm going to very, very quickly go around. And usually I do try to trim as closely to as possible to the stitching, but make sure you do not accidentally cut into the fabric. Okay, so I trimmed away as close as possible. I will just cut as many of these little tails away. Now I'll just take the design, turn it inside out, and if you do see that there's any hoop burn within the design, and hoop burn can often happen where the two pieces of the hoop actually end up touching the fabric. If you take your iron and hit it with a little bit of steam around those areas and just rub it down a little bit, that hoop burn should disappear. So here's our end result. Our design is finished and ready to wear. We hope you enjoyed this video on how to embroider on t-shirts. So make sure you comment down below if you have any questions, or click this video if you want to see the next in our series. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.